Welcome to another episode of Wild and Well. Today I'm talking to Nicole Runyon about so many things, including how we can support our children to thrive, become independent, and navigate some of the tricky things that are reality for children nowadays and for parents nowadays. This is a conversation for parents. So, Nicole is a psychotherapist, she is a parent coach, a keynote speaker, and the author of the best-selling book Free to Fly, which I have just been reading this week and I'm loving it. So thank you for putting that out into the world. Welcome, Nicole. Thanks for coming on this podcast. But before we get into all of those topics, can you tell us one thing that you've done today to take care of you?
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, it's great to be here to talk to you. And the one thing that I do typically every morning is I wake up early before anybody in my house. And there are varying degrees of what I do in that time. I'm not super like regimented about it. It's just the idea of having the quiet time. Sometimes I just sit in the dark and drink my coffee and and just be quiet and have that peace. And sometimes I exercise, and sometimes I actually get some work done without distractions or interruptions. And it's sort of my favorite time of the day.
It's my favorite time of the day too, and I'm very similar to you. There's certain things that I do in my mornings, but they're really flexible, and sometimes it is just sitting there and having my tea in the dark, looking out the window and like nothing else. And the exercise is great, meditation's great, but sometimes just sitting there and having a warm drink is like the most nourishing thing.
It really is, yeah. And you're better than me because you do the tea and I do the coffee.
It's loose leaf, it's very caffeinated, so can you share a little bit about you and like what it is that you do?
So originally, I was a child psychotherapist, and I did that for about 20 years. And I loved it. I had never seen myself doing anything else. In fact, I knew I wanted to be a child psychologist since I was 10 years old. So it definitely, for me, was less work or less of a job than it was more of a calling and just something that I knew I had to do. And so somewhere along the way, it actually started around 2014, 2015, that started to shift because I started to see a pattern in my practice with children that was odd to me. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. I was getting severe mental health issues, mainly adolescent girls, many of them coming out of the hospital after their first suicide attempt, self-harming, eating disordered, panic disordered, school avoidant. I mean, I was seeing such severe mental health issues, but nothing rooted in trauma, in anything psychosocial that I could connect it to. Intact, loving, supportive, caring families, parents sitting there right next to their kids, wondering what was wrong, offering to help. And it's not to say there weren't things, right? There was friend conflict or conflict at home or sibling conflict, things to work on, but nothing to warrant the severity of symptoms I was seeing. And so I started to sort of dig deep into what technology and smart devices and social media might be doing to the kids and how it might be affecting them. And I kind of came to realize that it very much was infiltrating their development. And in my knowledge and studies of child development, I know that each stage is very foundational and it builds. And so if kids are missing things in stages, then things are going to go awry, and they were going awry. And so I started talking about it right around 2016. And I'd come up with sort of a presentation for parents. And people were interested. They were very much in agreement. Yes, the devices are affecting the kids. I saw the correlation in my practice to when my community schools allowed the phones to be on during the school day. When they first came on the scene, the schools were like, nope, nope, no phones, they have to be off and away. And then all of a sudden there was like green lights. And it was highly correlated to the issues I was seeing with the mental health. And so then over time, I realized that, it's not just the tech. The tech is certainly very much affecting their development. But the bigger issue or the macro issue, I think, is that the parents aren't able to step into their authority when it comes to things like tech, right? And not just tech, but all around overall health for our children. Like you and I were just talking about before we started recording, like the food and the level of junk food that children are exposed to, and the lack of limits and boundaries that the adults have around that. And overall, this idea that parents are sort of more permissive today and less able to, you know, allow for discomfort and allow for kids to be bored and go through painful feelings. And I think that's heavily to do with why we're seeing the kids so severely mentally ill. Like, they can't, seem to cope or get through hard things, everyday hard things that previous generations were able to work through. And so, what I decided to do actually was flip the script. Rather than seeing kids for therapy, I now coach parents. And, my goal is really to serve parents in a way to help them feel capable, to feel confident, to feel less guilt about the things they think they're not doing for their kids, and to really step more into their authority and not just have limits and boundaries and rules around tech or junk food, but overall, like, help their be the container and help their kids through those painful feelings, and acknowledging that life is hard, growth is painful, and that's okay as long as they have support while they're going through it, but they can't avoid it.
Yeah, I totally hear you. I was nodding along the whole time you're saying that. And I too, I work with parents on a number of different challenges that children are going through. And I used to work with kids more so, like with kids, teenagers, and young adults. And I remember so many times having parents drop their 12-year-old off and pick them up. And that was it. That was the involvement that they had. And they were involved in their lives in lots of ways, but they needed to be in the sessions and so much more. They needed to be the ones that were predominantly there and their kids just occasionally because parents play such a critical role. A therapist can only do so much in 1 hour a week, but the parents are there all the time and they're the ones that can really shift things for children and put the important boundaries in place and help to develop the resilience.
Absolutely. Yeah. What you're describing is exactly what I experienced. And I pretty much started calling it like soccer practice. The parents' mentality was like drop off, pick up, card on file. And it was like pulling teeth to get them to talk to me. I would have to call them and arrange, to meet with them separately. And even that, they just wouldn't commit to. And that was really eye-opening for me.
Do you notice now working with parents instead of with the kids that you can affect a lot more change?
Yes, 100%. And it actually is very powerful very quickly.
Mm.
So, what I think is important for parents to know is that, again, if there's no known trauma, if there's no issue that is going to take a while to sort of work through or get to the other side of, that they have a lot more control and power than they realize, and influence as well. And so the power really comes in with their connection to their kids. And I find myself having to help parents understand that they're the most powerfully positioned to connect to their child and help their child than I am. And I was really good at doing child therapy, right? I connected really well with them, but it's going to take me a lot longer to build that rapport and gain that trust from a child so that they're ready to work on whatever it is they need to work on. Whereas a parent can do that in one day, literally. There's a lot of power in putting your devices down, including the parents. This is often something I talk about, that we have to do the same if we want the kids to do that. And just connecting over a meal, cooking a meal together, sitting down and eating it together. And these are things that any parent can implement like immediately. And when we're looking into each other's eyes, that cues our nervous system for safety. So when there's no devices and there's no distractions and we're talking and we're looking at each other, that immediately lets everybody's guard down and opens up a huge window for connection. And that connection we can build on. So it's very powerful work.
Yeah, that really is the foundation, your attachment, that connection to your child. It changes everything and it makes everything in parenting a lot easier if you start there and if you
Yeah,
keep going back to that spot.
That's right. Yeah. And then your kids develop that sense of trust in you that because attachment builds trust.
Mhm.
And then, while they're going to resist and push back on the rules, they can respect the rules. So to your point, it does make parenting easier.
Yeah. Yeah, there will obviously still be challenges, no question.
Of course.
Yeah. So in your book, you talk about how children are mirrors reflecting our own childhood wounds. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah. So when we look at them, and sometimes, a lot of times, they even look like us. So it's very easy to do. When we look at them, we see ourselves, and they are reflecting back to us the things that are unresolved from our own childhoods or our own, early adulthood or whatever's unresolved that we didn't get the chance to work through. And chances are that if you're struggling in your parenting with a child at a certain age, that it's that you were that age when things didn't go well and perhaps are unresolved. And so in the book, I talk about, the example, my own example and my own situation when I was 9. My mom had baby number 5, and, I was obviously a lot older and just really felt a lot of big feelings about that. And we had, the same year, we had moved and I had to change schools, and so much of my life changed, and I struggled emotionally. And my parents really didn't know how to be there for me because there wasn't a lot of help for parents back then with how your kids feel. And so when both of my kids were 9, I found myself really struggling with their emotions, struggling with my expectations of them, because there was high expectations of me as one of the older children in a big family. And my kids weren't really exhibiting the level of responsibility that I did at their age. And so I found myself making when I was your age statements. And it wasn't until I stopped to reflect on myself and what was unresolved in me that I realized that I was going about it in the wrong way with my kids. And that's why there was so much tension and friction and conflict. And I was feeling not good as a parent. And so I always want parents to know, like, I'm not perfect. I have all this knowledge. I have experience. Yes, I wrote a book, but I still get caught in this self-reflection mirror thing with my kids. It's hard not to do. But as long as we're aware of it and we are able to sort of look at ourselves and our part and make those changes that we need to make as parents, then we can kind of go back to our kids and repair some of that conflict and resistance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we allow it, being a parent is probably like the number one self-development tool because
Yes.
you just have no choice. Like you're in it. You might as well learn from it and have more awareness of what's going on for yourself and work through those things.
Yes, absolutely. And I always say it's the most hardest form
Yeah.
of self-reflection and self-improvement because it's not just you. You have to acknowledge that if you did something wrong or you made a mistake, that it affected your child and potentially even hurt your child. And that is unbearable for parents because it's never our intention.
No, and it's hard when you realize some patterns that were unconscious before that you are bringing into your parenting years down the track. Like there can be a lot of guilt connected to that. It's great if we become aware and we make changes, but it can be hard to look back and think, oh, but all those years I was doing something similar and I was ingraining those habits in our children. Like, what do you recommend for parents when they are feeling that guilt around that?
Yeah, I think that one thing for parents to know is that discomfort is a part of life. Pain is a part of life. It's a part of relationships. You can't avoid it.
Mhm.
And so the only way out of it is through it. And experiencing it is uh, okay. And so I know like there are a lot of parents that I've counseled, young adults, and often they'll go to their parents with their gripes about their childhood or their issues or whatever. And the parents will inevitably say something like, well, I don't remember that, or that's not how it was, or get over it, right? You're an adult now. And that really is parents' lack of ability to experience that pain of hearing their child, hearing their experience, and validating it. And I think most of us in previous generations, that's what we got from our parents. And so what I think Gen X has done with their Gen Z kids who are now, late 20s to early adulthood teenagers, is swung the pendulum too far in the other direction, where because like Gen X feels so much guilt and shame around making those mistakes because their parents didn't hear them or validate their feelings. They've gone too far in the other direction with allowing their Gen Z kids feelings to drive everything and to be overly concerned about the feelings and not allow for pain and discomfort. And so I think overall, parents, kids, everybody needs to be able to sit in that. Not forever, right? I always tell people, I'm not going to keep you there forever. That's not the goal, because then that could lead to depression and anxiety and things that we don't want. But certainly enough time to where we can get to the other side of it because we went through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about this often that kids and teenagers now have so much instant gratification. Parenting now is a lot more permissive, and the use of devices to like self-regulate that they don't necessarily experience that sitting with discomfort, and they don't learn to work through boredom or frustration. But frustration tolerance is such an important skill in life because life is uncomfortable. There can be things that we don't like and things that are frustrating. So being able to sit in that and move through that is so critical. So for parents who are wanting to support their kids to like skill up in this skill, what do you suggest that they do?
Well, I think, we're talking about families who probably have a lot of privilege in the sense that they can give their kids enrichment activities. They can provide their children with some wants because they have their needs met. And so ultimately, these are families and children who need some challenges, right? And those challenges can come in the form of if they are a conscientious student who's interested in higher education and who really, sort of cares about grades, then parents can have high expectations that homework and studying and being school ready by getting enough sleep and nutrition can be really important. And that's hard, right? Because that requires the child to maybe not be on screens till really late, like some of their friends, or choose a healthier diet than maybe some of their friends. And essentially, they're choosing hard or they're choosing challenges over dopamine. And the same can go for if your child is really interested in a sport or an extracurricular activity. Parents really do want to provide some of that pushing for your kid to challenge themselves and get better and improve and sort of perform well. And I think that in our culture, we look down upon that because we think that that's forcing children to perform. We're, externalizing everything they're doing. We're not validating really who they are on the inside. And, it could cause stress on them. And so, in no way do I advocate for parents pushing their kids like beyond what they think they're capable of. So there's a balance here, but certainly we want as parents to send them the message that we believe in them and we believe that they can do hard things and we believe they're capable. Because if we don't do that, then they're never going to see themselves that way. So those are, I think, opportunities for parents to provide some challenges for their kids who maybe have an easier life overall.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you're absolutely right that right now everything is about rewarding participation. And I think that is really important. Like effort is something that should be rewarded. Um, but it's interesting that you bring up that point that we can also like push our kids to achieve what they are able to achieve. Do you have any
Yeah, and
examples of that? Like,
yeah, I actually have a couple from my own children. Well, one, my oldest is 17, and then my youngest is about to be 12. And so they both have something that they're very passionate about. My son is passionate about golf, and my daughter is passionate about musical theater. And so they both have some really sort of natural talent for both of those things. But the natural talent isn't getting them to the place that they personally want to be. They've set goals. So my son has set a goal that he wants to play golf in college. He's a junior in high school. And, he's at a point to where he is sort of the top of his team, his golf team at school. But that's not near where he needs to be for college. So he is interested in leveling up and sort of getting better. And, that started this past summer. But, there were times when he was sleeping in and he was sitting on the couch on his phone and, not going to bed early enough and sort of not doing the things he said he wanted. And so my husband and I felt it was our job to hold him accountable to the things he said he wanted. So we sort of had to get more strict about the rules, which, he was 16 at the time. So we had sort of backed off on a lot of the rules because he had had a lot of freedom and independence with driving. And he was proving to us that we could trust him with that. And so we sort of backed off on those parenting rules. But this summer we had to kind of go right back into it because we thought it was our job to hold him accountable, and he appreciated that. And then same for my daughter. She is wanting to get a lead role in a play that she'll be auditioning for in a couple weeks. And just last night we were having the discussion because she wanted to watch TV and make dessert. And I said, well, those are dopamine things, right? And your audition is in 2 weeks and you say you want the lead role. And so what you really should be doing is practicing. And I told her specifically what I thought she needed to work on. And so she made the choice to not do the dopamine and instead do the work that she needed to do. And so, was that hard as a parent in both situations? Yes, absolutely. I would prefer to see my kids happy and comfortable, full of dopamine, feeling good, right? And instead, I'm trying to hold them accountable to the things they said they wanted. And in no way have I forced either of them to do these things. They have chosen that these are their goals. And so that's our job is to be the container for them to achieve those goals.
Yeah, I like how you word that, that we are the container to help them achieve their goals.
Yeah,
And I think our role is to support our kids and be that frontal lobe for them to remind them like, okay, well, maybe watching TV it's an option, but could you be practicing and help them to make those decisions themselves, but facilitate that, not just assume that they can make all those decisions because they tend to think more in the short term.
that's right. Yeah.
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 I love that you talk about primitive reflexes in your work. I'm very obsessed with these and I'm taking courses on them myself. And I think every parent needs to know about them, but there's something that nobody I talk to knows about them other than on the podcast and like professionally, but in my personal life or with clients, like we haven't heard about these things. So, can you tell us why primitive reflexes are important, like what gets in the way of them being integrated, and how we can support our kids to have optimal development through integrating our reflexes?
Yeah, isn't it? I just before I go into that, I just as colleagues, I just think it's so fascinating and it's so important for us to understand from our perspective to help parents with it because to your point, people don't know about it and it's so significant. And so really what it is you know, we have a central nervous system that um, babies use to survive. And they use these reflexes when they're infants because they can't communicate. So it's their way of telling their caregivers what they need. So an example is the rooting reflex, where when you touch the side of their mouth, then they start looking for a nipple to suck because they're telling you that they're hungry. And that's their way of telling you. And sure, they can cry and tell you they're hungry, but it's another way for them to express and communicate it physically to where then the caregiver just knows what to do. And I think all of the reflexes should be what's considered integrated by one. I think there's one reflex that takes 3 years. And what integration means is that those reflexes sort of disappear into the nervous system. They don't go away, they disappear because the baby starts moving more, right? They're crawling, they're walking, they're touching things, they're grabbing things, they're pointing to things. And then they start to use their words and verbalize what they need. And so then the body says, oh, well, we don't need these reflexes anymore. And so that's sort of the natural way, and that's what we want to see as our kids develop. And what actually helps to integrate those reflexes is movement. So we want to make sure we're allowing for them to get any and all kind of movement possible, especially outside in nature. And so what we're finding today is that our kids are not moving as much. Our babies, our toddlers, are not moving because of technology. So you think of even a baby, can't hold an iPad, right? But a parent can certainly have a device in their face, preventing them from interacting with their baby. And babies then tend to um, lose the ability to communicate when their caregivers aren't communicative with them. And so they don't move as much. And the same for like a toddler isn't going to move as much because either the parent has a screen and not interacting, or because the parent is distracted and busy, there's some contraption they're keeping the baby or the child in to keep them safe so they don't have to watch them, which again prevents movement. Or now we're giving 1 year olds and 2 year olds tablets. 40% of 2 year olds have their own tablet, like they actually own their own tablet. And so, again, it's like we have a lot of conversation, which is great. We have a lot of conversation around the content that our kids are being exposed to. And I think parents think, oh, well, my 2 year old's watching, Miss Rachel or doing an activity that is educational. But what we're not having conversation about is what they're not doing in the real world because they're on the device, and what they're not doing is literally moving. So what's happening is those reflexes aren't integrating. They're doing what's called held. So the babies are keeping those reflexes well into toddlerhood and even school age years. And each reflex has some symptoms associated with them when they're held. And that could be from having learning disabilities to bedwetting to behavioral issues to neurodevelopmental issues like ADD, ADHD. And what we're doing with these kids is we're treating them in like all of these systems, right? We're treating them in the mental health system. We're treating them in the medical system. We're giving them medication for these symptoms or these issues. And we don't have a deeper level of understanding of one, why this is happening, and two, what really actually needs to be done about it. And what needs to be done about it is what's called sensory motor integration. And that is a series of occupational therapy and physical therapy type movement specific to each reflex.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for describing that and telling us all about it. I think when parents hear this, then they realize how important it is. But if there's something we just don't know about, we just don't know about it. And we do then look to the types of treatment that we are aware of, like therapy and the medical system. And those can be useful in their own ways. But that doesn't mean that they're getting at the root of it. And I think so much of the work that you and I do, probably if we look at that, a lot of the issues wouldn't be there, would they?
That's right. No, they wouldn't. And that's what's so amazing about the level of understanding is that we really can help kids and help families. Because as we know, when there's a child with special needs, the whole family is affected. The parents, the siblings, the dynamic. And so, yeah, it can be very powerful. And just one more point about this that I had learned from talking with practitioners that understand this and work with families is that it's not just the tech, it's also the ultra processed foods that are high in sugar that inflame the body. Because when the body's inflamed, then that prevents from those systems from working. And actually, that inflammation can be considered as trauma to the body, and then it prevents from that development of the reflexes. All around, I think just a healthier lifestyle is really important. Proper sleep, limits on technology, and limits on junk food.
Yeah. So talk to us about ultra processed food and the food that you recommend that children and teenagers eat nowadays, and how you see this being an issue. Like what sort of problems does it cause? Like that is one that is really massive, but what else do you see it associated with?
Yeah, I see a lot of attention and focus, brain issues, executive functioning deficits from all of this inflammation.
Mm.
And so I always would look at that when families were reporting ADD, ADHD type symptoms. And that was always sort of my first go-to, like look at the diet and sort of this level of understanding of just over their overall nutrition, because there's literally food that feeds the brain and there is food that shuts down the brain. And unfortunately, what our kids are being exposed to in their diets mostly shut down the brain. Um, you know, School lunches, vending machines in schools, the things that they're feeding children all day in school. It's really a wonder how anybody learns. Yeah, I do think that that's a big part of it. And that's also hard, right? I often will recognize how what I'm asking of parents, right? But I talk about this in the book that I hold myself in my own parenting to that same high standard. And it's exhausting, trying to make meals and nourish my kids and make sure that they understand they're educated because they're older and they're out in the world and they have to make those decisions themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It's a real challenge. I find it's one of the biggest challenges in modern day parenting is going against the norm. And the norm is unfortunately like setting our kids up to not thrive, whether it comes to the screens, the lack of movement, the food that is just completely void of nutrients, so many different things. It can be really exhausting.
It really can be, yeah. Yeah, but with the knowledge, it can also be very empowering.
Mhm.
Like years ago, I had seen a video. It was a study that was done where they fed kids. They had two birthday parties, and at one birthday party they fed kids whole, healthy, nutritious foods, and on the at the other birthday party it was all your typical stuff, right? The high sugar, high ultra processed. And you could see the behavior like immediately in the kids that ate the ultra processed foods. They were bouncing off the walls and not listening and really out of control, as opposed to the kids who had eaten the nutritious food. They, were calmer and more playful, but, typical kids in that sense, but appropriate and not out of control. So, when we're talking about behavioral issues just in general, so many teachers are having to institute behavior modification, and that's how they're spending their time rather than learning. And so much of that, I think, would be remedied with healthier, nutritious foods.
Yeah, we have to choose our heart. Do we want our heart to be putting in all that effort to make those meals, to educate our kids, to affect change at schools, or do we want our heart to be dealing with our children's behavior being off the wall and them being irritable? And us, if we're eating it, we feel the same way. It affects us as well as adults. So it can just, that hard. I think most of us listening have probably experienced that, and that's pretty exhausting in itself.
Absolutely, it is. You're right. Yeah. So if the whole family is not, optimal and at their 100%, it's going to be hard to function for sure. And I think too that we have to remember that our kids are telling us something with those behaviors. And rather than pathologizing them and pointing the finger and saying, oh, well, you have the problem, right? You have a behavioral disorder, you have ADD, or you have, anxiety. We really do want to flip that onto ourselves. Like, what is our part in that? What is our level of responsibility? And what do we need to do to help them with it? And I'm not saying that this is a silver bullet and it will eradicate all of the issues we're seeing with our children, but I certainly think it would eradicate a high percentage of it. And then we would be able to actually have a benchmark and see what is actually pathological, what is actually dysfunctional. And that will there will be more access to mental health care if we took care of the kids who really don't need it. Because what we're experiencing now is a huge influx of kids flooding into the mental health system, and there's not enough infrastructure for it. I know in my community, all of the therapists who see kids are perpetually booked. If a child needs, they need hospital, that's few and far between. That's hard to find. And even if you do find it, it's not for very long. And it's not, really leading to true healing. So I think if we took care of some of these situations where kids really have no business being in the mental health system, we'd have space for those who really need it.
Yeah, that would be incredible if we could just focus on lifestyle and nutritional changes. And you're right, that would free up so much space for the people who have gone through trauma or have challenges that are more severe and like are actually like there versus it just being the food they're eating or the lack of sleep they're getting because they're on screens.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I love that. You talk a lot in your book and in your work about like fostering more independence and that separation, like that individuation in childhood or in as our kids get older. How do we as parents help that process? I think we can be so overprotective as a generation. Like we are quite overprotective as parents. There's a lot of fear. What can we do to like foster that in our children and help them in that normal development?
We have to be okay with their struggle. And that's hard, right? Because we want to help them. And most of the time, we can help them. We have the resources to help them. We have the knowledge and the wisdom from making mistakes ourselves. And, as we have learned from our mistakes, they have to as well. So that's why, the first chapter in my book is the mirror and how we talked about that parent self-reflection piece. That really is the foundation for my work because that requires us to be uncomfortable with their discomfort. So I'll give you an example of a mistake I made that I didn't really realize until later on in my oldest childhood. When he was one, there was a video of us playing. There was music playing, and we were dancing, we were having fun. And he starts crawling over to a low profile bed, and he starts climbing up on the bed, right? Just like any toddler would. And he's doing the whole grunting thing, right? Like he's struggling. And he absolutely could do it on his own. I was watching the video. I'm like, he could have done it on his own. But what did I do? I helped him up on the bed because in that moment, I was feeling uncomfortable with his struggle. And he wasn't crying. He wasn't distressed. He wasn't even looking at me for help. He was just struggling. And I hadn't, in the moment, I didn't think anything of it, but I happened to watch this video when he was like, I think around 9 or 10. And I immediately stopped the video and I looked at my husband and I showed it to him and I said, "This is where I went wrong." Because what was going on for him at that age at 9 and 10 was that he wasn't independent like I would have expected. He wasn't doing the things like he wasn't working through hard things or challenges. And I had realized that it must not have been just that one moment when he was one. It must have been many moments along the way that I just sort of, lifted him up because I could. And he was an only child for 5 years. So I absolutely could because I wasn't distracted with other kids like a lot of parents are. And so, yeah, that's really what we need to acknowledge is like getting out of their way and allowing them to struggle and to contend with something. That's important.
And what do you do when you make that realization? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of parents listening thinking, oh, yeah,
Guilt.
I've been doing that. Yeah, exactly. Like, how do you start that process at, at the age when your child is 9, for your example, or at any age when you have that awareness? What do you do to help foster that independence?
Yeah. So where I started at that point was pretty simply just expecting him to do more around the house. Like we had given him the chore to mow the lawn. And we knew that that would really help him feel capable because it was a hard job, right? And it was also something he had to learn how to do. And so he did that and he started cooking. His favorite thing at that time was pancakes. And, pancakes, by the way, because my daughter did this too, are the best way to, if your kids are cooking, to give them a challenge because it's really hard to flip them. And both of my kids struggled with that flipping and they wanted to give up and they really were frustrated. And that was my perfect opportunity, I thought, to sort of remedy some of that help that I had given him earlier on and just allowed him to do more things like that around the house. And then once his confidence was built and we could see that that was foundational, we started to challenge him more out in the world. So whether that was sticking with an activity that he had signed up for or pushing him to finish intern and assignments at school because he didn't really wasn't interested in doing that. And he had said it's because there wasn't competition among the boys in his class because the boys in the class were also not really caring about that. Nor were there consequences from the teacher. And so these were things that we had thought, okay, well, now he's foundationally kind of doing more at home. Now let's kind of put it in the context of the outside world and allowing for more natural consequences and not hovering so much. So it took a while, but it certainly built him into, a 17-year-old who's very independent. So much so that I have to say to him, "Hey, can we have dinner together like next Thursday? Can you just stop with your schedule for 5 minutes so we can see you?"
Yeah, that's really nice to hear that like it's not if we realize that we're doing something that we would prefer not to do as a parent, we can remedy that. Like it's never too late to make those changes, is it? And there's so
No.
much that we can do.
So much that we can do. And, at the very beginning of that was me having to sit in my guilt about it and be with it and not avoid it and not, think that I was just going to get myself out of it quickly. It took a while. And to this day, I still struggle a little bit with, oh, I wish I would have known if only I knew. But that's something we all have to acknowledge that we are going to make mistakes because we're good enough and we're not perfect.
Yeah, and that's all we have to be as a parent. Like we're never going to be perfect, and if we try to be, that's not even helpful for our children. They need to
Right.
see that we make mistakes and that that's part of life and that's normal and that's okay.
Yeah, because you're right, because that's us modeling that failure is a part of life and it's actually necessary. It's a gift
Yeah,
because it teaches us and it makes us strong and resilient.
yeah, absolutely. In your book, you also talk about the importance of everybody in the family, like knowing their role and children understanding what their role is within the family. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? Because I think sometimes our roles do get muddled and we sometimes want to like be our kid's friend, and that's not necessarily like who we are as a mother or a father.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that when we all can take ownership for our part in things, that can be a really powerful relationship dynamic. So it's really easy, and we all do it, to point the finger at the other person and say, well, you did this or you didn't do that. And we think we can control them or we think we can change their behavior. And that's going to make everything better and we'll feel better and more resolved. But ultimately, it's a trap because we can't control anybody except ourselves. And so, what I really like for parents and kids to do is acknowledge, hey, what is your part? And what do you have control over? And what can you do to change whatever it is you don't like about the relationship or about the family or the family dynamic in general? And I do this with parents, so to your point about that idea that they want to be their kids' friends, I think it's a lot easier for them to see that their role is not to keep their kids happy and comfortable, right? Do we want our kids to be happy? Yes, absolutely. But happiness is a feeling that doesn't last forever, right? Just like any other feeling, it's a fleeting feeling. And so the goal isn't to make them happy. The goal really needs to be to make them strong and capable and able to trust themselves and have that agency because they're going to go out in the world without us and they need that foundation. So when parents look at their role in the family dynamic, instead of scapegoating the child or saying my child has anxiety or they need therapy or they need medication, then the parent can own that maybe they had a part in their child experiencing anxiety, for example, because kids who are anxious are kids who didn't get their independence fostered. So it's this idea of like, my parents did everything for me, and now I'm anxious to go out in the world because I don't know how to do it, or I don't trust myself, or I'm scared to do it, or they sent me the message subconsciously that they don't trust me or I'm not capable. Because when we allow our kids to do the things that we're sort of doing for them, then we send them the message that we believe in them and they can do it. And then they feel like they can do it. So when parents can own that, then the kid can start to change and we can start to see some of these symptoms dissipate. And the same with the kid, right? They need to own, like my son, for example, needed to own that, okay, this failure on my part isn't your fault, but it is sort of your responsibility because now for yourself, you need to do these things. And that's really important. And so he had to sort of undo that concept of feeling like he wasn't required to do things or he didn't have to do hard things. And that was an adjustment too.
It's so important. Like what you just said there is so important. People need to go back and just listen to that again and again because that I think that can change so much for us as parents and for our children and for like their adulthood too.
Yeah, it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And it really wasn't until I recognized what my part was in my family dynamic that everything started to change. It was quite remarkable. And my husband did the same for himself in his parenting. And then ultimately it helped our marriage as well, because then we each took responsibility for what wasn't, going right. And yeah, it's huge. It's so huge. I love that message.
Yeah, if we can all really know and experience that what we have control over is our actions and we don't necessarily have control over somebody else's. So, like, what part are we playing? And focus on that. How do you recommend talking to children about this? Because like I have two kids and they definitely we talk to them about it a lot because they'll be arguing about something. Like this morning, they both wanted some toy and they were just blaming each other. They were pointing the finger. Oh, well, he did this. Oh, he did that. Okay. And it the blame is just so like it's not useful. And adults still do this. So I would say the majority of people still go through life externalizing it, saying that, oh, it's the outside world, it's the other person, it's all these other things, and that's the problem, and not owning their part in it. Like, how can we actually help foster that in our children, especially, I guess, in their not necessarily the earlier years, but like in their childhood?
Yeah. I think that parents often find themselves being the referee, right? When kids are fighting. And so I always tell parents this method is you'll have to be the referee, but the goal is that you're eventually going to pull yourself out of that role because they won't need you to be that anymore. So you're not enabling it, you're actually teaching. And what you're teaching is sitting them down and saying, okay, what was your part? What did you do? Right? And inevitably, kids will say, I didn't do anything. He started it. She started it. Right? That's what they do. And so the parent really has to facilitate that. No, even if your brother or your sister started it, you had a part in it. What was your part, right? So, and then that could be you acted out instead of walking away, or you tried to take matters into your own hands, and maybe you needed to ask for help in that moment, right? And so as long as they're each owning their part and they're not blaming the other person, then the conflict can start to, get resolved quicker. The parent doesn't feel like they have to take sides, right? Because that is a sticky situation. And sometimes it does, a lot of times actually, it is like one kid was wrong, right? And you as the parent see it that way. But you definitely want to make sure you empower the kid who was sort of victimized, so that they're not always coming to you and they feel like they can solve the problem on their own. And so then, of course, on the other end with the kid, maybe that was the aggressor, taking ownership and responsibility and accountability for their part in harming their sibling or hurting their sibling or upsetting their sibling can be very powerful too. Because as we all know, when there's conflict, they're trying to tell us something. There's messages there, right? So if a kid is acting out, chances are there's something going on. Maybe they're tired, maybe they're hungry, maybe they had a bad day and didn't process it. So we really want to empower them to give them ownership over what can you do about it, right? So when I feel frustrated with my sister, I want to, hit her. And I have to like look at, oh, well, maybe I'm frustrated because I haven't eaten in a few hours and I need something to eat, right? So just empowering that kid to feel like they can recognize their feelings and then know what to do about it so that they don't hurt their sibling.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And imagine if all kids learned that in
Ah,
childhood. Like we would have a totally different world.
totally different world. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And hopefully that could be a take home. And there's so many incredible messages that you've given us today. But if we can all just work on implementing that, knowing our part and supporting our children to understand their part in any conflict, any situation, I highly recommend listeners do that.
Yes.
Was there anything that you wanted to talk about here, or you're hoping that I was going to ask that we didn't cover?
I think that we covered a lot, right? I mean, yeah, I think we did great. And one thing that I do want parents to understand is the intricate ways that children develop. And so in my book, I go through a four-part process where I explain child development, starting with movement, because movement actually scaffolds the brain for growth. So just as we talked about, movement helps the body develop, of course, it also helps the brain develop. And then once the brain develops, then the child can move into social emotional development. And then ultimately to that, what I consider a connection to self, which is 3 points in childhood where kids separate and individuate. And we talked about that a bit. But if parents are interested in really doing a deep dive into that, that's all in the book, and that's kind of the majority of the book is helping parents understand like those stages of development and what kids need and when they need it.
Yeah, your book is incredible. I'm not all the way through it, but I'm like 75% through. And if like anything we're talking about today is resonating with you, like you have to go and read this book, Free to Fly. It's definitely a manual that parents need.
Thank you. I'm happy that you're enjoying it.
And where can people find out more from you, get the book, learn from you, work with you?
hmm So my website's NicoleRunyon.com. There is a tab called My Book, so people can order it there. You can order it really anywhere online. It's available everywhere. And I'm on Instagram at iGeneration Mental Health and LinkedIn at Nicole Runyon.
Okay, excellent. We'll have all those in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on here and talking to us and providing us with all this really useful and tangible information and for the work that you're doing in the world because we definitely need it.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.